good.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Dr. Jamie Mathias, Executive Director of the TLSBA, the Texas Latino School Boards Association. And today we have the pleasure of beginning a new 5-week webinar series on the challenges presented by the lies of Texas. For those who were able to join us for our last webinar series, we were beginning to delve into some of the effects of the Texas education miracle that propelled a Texas governor to the White House in 2000. Today, we're going to continue unpacking it. Today, we have a friend of ours, Mr. George Scott, who is a former trustee from the Katy ISD, also a former director of the Texas Association of School Boards. Welcome, Mr. Scott.
Thank you again.
Glad to have you with us, Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, I just want to begin by saying we all love HEB. I was just shopping there last night. We were shopping at Central Market a week ago, which is part of the HEB chain. We all love HEB, not only for its nourishing us and helping us to get the resources that we need, but also for their tremendous, tremendous support of public education here in Texas. We know that HEB has created what they call their Excellence in Education Awards, which has put millions of dollars in the hands of our education professionals. And we are extremely, extremely grateful to all of our friends at HEB. So we begin by tipping our hats in the direction of all our friends at HEB. This webinar today really is not about HEB. And to be fair, their criteria for assessing excellence in education deals with parent involvement and innovation in education. So they look at very different factors from what we are. And if we were to be honest as well, we would have to admit that this webinar really is not about the 5 ISDs, the 5 school districts that are finalists for the HEB Excellence in Education Awards either. This is about something deeper. And that is what this webinar is about, is looking at this representative set of school districts as they confront the effects of the Texas education miracle and the impact that the lies of Texas, these 3 decades of accountability, have had on Texas education. Tragic effects of us passing students to subsequent grade levels who lack necessary knowledge and skills. And that will be reflected later, Mr. Scott, when we start looking at the high college dropout rates among students who are enrolled in our institutions here in Texas. Before we begin, I just want to use one statistic. We were at a TASB Summer Leadership Institute in Fort Worth a few years ago when Dr. Michael Klein of the Hobby Center at Rice University shared with us this number. If we were able to close academic achievement gaps in Texas by 2050, so let's give ourselves over 25 years to do this, but if we could close academic achievement gaps in Texas by 2025, says Dr. Michael Klein of Hobby Center at Rice University, we would add $899 billion with a B dollars to our Texas economy. We are losing $899 billion per year every year that we have failed to close this gap. So having said that, Mr. Scott, welcome. Glad to have you with us. Let's unpack what it is that we might learn from these 5 HEB Excellence in Education Award finalist districts.
All right, but first, before we get down to serious business, can I join you with an HEB? I actually have 2 goals for this particular webinar. One, I want my HEB coupons to still be valid when the webinar's over. Okay.
I hope that's the case.
And 2, the issues that we have been talking about and the issues that we're going to be talking about today and over the next 3 weeks have absolutely nothing to do with HEB. HEB is an economic powerhouse for Texas. It is an economic engine for families and jobs. So I want to join you by reminding you that several months ago, when we envisioned this, we were looking at each other and we mutually agreed, you know, that to do our job on behalf of at-risk disadvantaged children, statistically dominated by children of color, we're going to have to take a chance in making our allies uncomfortable, maybe even angry, because there is no way that we can tell the story of the tragedy that we've been talking about in prior webinars and that we're going to deal with today without looking at the campuses. But one point that you have made repeatedly, I have concurred, is that school districts are the institutional victim. They are being held administratively hostage to a state government and a state organization that has a vested interest in not telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So please, I guess there is some degree of irony that we're starting out this next phase and we have to invoke HEB in any way. But that's the real world, because we said we're going to take advantage of every opportunity to point out what's happening in public education in Texas. So with that, we've done our appropriate remarks for HEB, but nonetheless, there are things that must be said.
There we go. Mr. Scott, I know you prepared a presentation for us before we jump into our monograph. Go for it.
All right, look, this is a reminder. We have published this before. We have talked about it before. But today and over the next 3 weeks, we're going to really start honing in on what we've talked about. Students performing below grade level who pass the test. And this, we're using 2018-19 because this is the last non-COVID year for which there was no impact, and it's still valid. And the first thing that we need to look at to put the graphs and the tables of a 40 or 50 page monograph that's today and ones to come, we have to accept what the Texas Education Agency has done. It has created a metrics called approach. And if students reach that approach threshold in any given test, they have passed the test. And as we've shown in direct quoting the TEA commissioner, the current TEA commissioner, the state of Texas defines the cut score at approach, or passing the test, as having met its constitutional equity. You don't have to be a psychometrician, a statistician, or anyone particularly just common sense. When the state of Texas establishes a 38% passing standard, 38% of the questions right on Algebra 1, 38% of the questions right on biology, 42% of the questions right in U.S. history, and you can look at the red. The red is the threshold of passing the test. This area is the threshold. So a student can pass the test, the accountability test, be counted by the Texas Education Agency as having met its statutory and constitutional burden to meet the needs of economically disadvantaged at-risk children, and they have self-defined it as below grade level. Let that just totally, completely sink in. This has nothing to do with academic integrity. It has nothing to do with HEB awards of excellence, trying to step in and help educators and kids. This has to do with the state of Texas artificially establishing standards which help protect it from legal action. And unfortunately, I believe I can make a strong case that civil rights attorneys and civil rights organizations have failed to use the data that is available to protect at-risk disadvantaged children. So this is the context of below grade level. And you give me your reaction.
Mr.
I mean,
Scott,
really.
let's just make sure that we understand this fully before going on. If you don't mind, some of our subsequent slides deal with 6th grade performance. So if you don't mind, we'll just look at 6th grade math, for instance. If I'm
Okay.
looking at sixth grade math, I'm understanding based on this that in 2018, 2019, the last non-COVID impacted year, that in sixth grade math, if we follow it across, that in order to be considered at grade level, a
No,
student.
not at grade level. Oh, well, finish, but 36.8 is not grade level.
No.
It is passing the test.
Yeah, let's start with the number that's 60.5%. If
Got
a
it.
student gets 60.5% or more of the questions correct, then she or he or they are considered to be at grade level. They are at or above grade level.
That is correct, and I apologize for
No
the
worries.
distraction there because
No
I thought
worries.
you were going the other way, but you are 1,000% right.
So now that we've set this baseline, in order to be at grade level, I need at least 60.5 or more percent of the questions correct. But now what I'm understanding, and we'll see this in the gray areas of the bar charts to come, is that the state of Texas has a lower bar, which it calls approaching grade level. So even if I only get 36.8 or 9% of the questions correct, then I will still pass the STAR test and be passed on to the next grade level, even though I've gotten, say, as low as a 36.8% of the questions correct of the answers.
There may be other factors that come into passing to the next grade level or being held back, factors that don't have anything to do with the STAR test. But you're exactly right in the big picture. You can get 36.8% of the math questions on the math test correct, and you will have passed that test. And passing that test is important to grade level determination.
Yikes, Mr. Scott. I'm understanding that I could fill out the letter A for all of the answers in this. I could fill out all the bubbles with the letter A and probably get a 25% chance of getting, get 25% of the questions right. You're suggesting that it takes very little more than that in order for me to pass the math test.
Yes, and so may I give a little additional context?
Go for it.
We've had three major eras of testing in the state of Texas, okay? TAS began it. In the TAS era, we've already demonstrated, and we will get back to that again, but we've already demonstrated that in the TAS era, that the state put questions that were demonstrably below grade level. And the higher the grade level, 8th and 10th grade, the lower level of the questions were. So they had a situation in TAS that to create the Texas Educational Miracle, they were putting questions on a 10th grade exit test that said, Steve goes into a restaurant with a $20 bill, he spends $6.85. How much change should Steve get? Well, that's an elementary, at tops, 5th or 6th grade question, but basically an elementary question. Sure. But it was on a 10th grade test. And they packed the TAS test, particularly at 7th, 8th, and 10th grade, tested at that time, with below grade level questions. So they could have a passing standard of 60 or 70% and look good. But when it came to the transition of tax and they put some harder test questions on the test, that's when the standards became manipulated.
So I'm understanding.
That's when they said, we're going to have to put harder questions on the test. The game is up. People are finding out. The RAND Corporation, mathematically correct. Dr. Kathleen Coburn, who did a report for TEA, the New York Times. I mean, just go on and on and on, and it was all falling off the tree. Their integrity was falling off the tree. So they put harder questions on the test when they transitioned to the second version of tax. But that's when they started lowering the passing standard.
Got it.
Harder questions, fewer right answers. And that persists through today.
So tell us what we're looking at now, Mr. Scott. These are the 5 finalist districts for the HEB Excellence in Education Awards.
Yes. And remember, the raw data that we have reports on every ethnicity. And readers will eventually have access to the full tables, the full charts. You'll see white, you'll see 2 or more, you'll see Asian, you'll see African American, et cetera. What we're focused on, because this is the Latino School Boards Association. We're focusing on Latinx students. We're focusing on economically disadvantaged, and we're focusing on retesters. Why? Because we're talking about equity. We're talking about the least of our children and how the state of Texas has schemed and gamed and played horrible games with the lives of children. So let's look at Klein. 45% of the students who took the English 1 test in 2018-19 were Latinx. Help me, Jamie, please help me.
Latinx is great.
Latinx, okay. 45% were of all Latinx students, 56% were below grade level. That means that the state of Texas needed that approach standard to pretend that more students were doing well on the test. In English 2, 58%. And you can look at the numbers for those students. But now look at economically disadvantaged. In Klein, 49% were economically disadvantaged. 61% were below grade level. And you can see McAllen, Pasadena, United, and Wiley. Let's make a point about Wiley. Of the 5 districts, Wiley ISD is the least disadvantaged. It is the most affluent. It is the most advantaged district. But it still has a contingent of students. And in the economic, 41% of the students in this district that does not fit the profile of Klein, McAllen, Pasadena, and United, 41% are still performing below grade level on English 1 and 46% on English 2. Now, what this table proves a couple of things, and you cut me off whenever you want. We know that not all minority children are disadvantaged, and not all minority children are at risk, and not all minority children are retesters. What this table proves is that students of every ethnicity are blowing the tops off the test. They're not down here in the zone to protect and defend the right of the state of Texas to be arbitrary with the lives of children. Those children are performing at the upper levels. They're going to college to get a degree. It's not about ethnicity. That's the reason we're focusing on economically disadvantaged, at-risk, and retesters in the 9th and 10th grade.
Now, Mr.
And
Scott,
what you see here is that at-risk students hit the 9th grade and 71% are below grade level. 81% in Klein are below grade level on English 2. Just harken back to that first table. In Pasadena, 77% in English 1, 79%. In United, 80% of the students who take the English 1 test are at risk, 68%, and 80% and 83% respectively fail English 1, English 2. And here's another tragedy that you and I have, we're really on this one. We need some more resources to get to the bottom of it. There are 19 to 20 or 30% of the students who reach the 9th grade, they fail the English test, they have to retake it again. 1/4 of the students in Pasadena ISD who took the English 1 test in 2018-19 were taking it for at least the second time, and 94% flunked English 1 and 95% flunked English 2. United, which is a predominantly, we know the economic profile there. United, 36%, over a third of their students in the 9th grade were having to retake the English 1 test, and 92% were failing it still. And you can see it. And so what we do know from another public information request is that in 2015-16, over 99,000 students who were enrolled as ninth graders in 2015-16 did not make it to become seniors in 2018-19. We have a public information request in. We are completely, totally, 100% dissatisfied and dismayed that the state of Texas does so little to define what happened to those 99,000 kids, how they performed in school. Can you imagine if 99,000 more kids from 2015-16 were taking the test in this year of 2018-19, what the results would look like? We're going to find that out. We get a few bucks in the bank and we will put in a custom public information request and we'll find out. What this does, remember, we're going to be talking about junior high school, upper middle, and junior high school in a minute. This tragedy didn't just start when the kids popped into Klein High School or McAllen High School or United High School or Wiley High School, by whatever name. This tragedy started in elementary and junior high school because the state of Texas has created an artificially manipulative, deceptive accountability system so that it can pretend that it's meeting the needs of disadvantaged, at-risk children, dominated by children of color. That's the reason you're seeing and looking at this table.
Tremendous. I have a feeling in a moment we're going to be seeing some of the gaps between at-risk and non-at-risk students. The retesters, though, that if we are understanding you correctly, Mr. Scott, in a single year, 99,000 students dropped out of high school. The TEA would classify them as leavers of various sorts. It seems that those numbers are in some way explained to some extent by the retester percentages we're seeing here.
Vastly more correct, but it does need a nuance.
Go for it.
Not all 99,000 may have dropped out in the 10th grade. Clearly. They may have hung around to the 10th grade. Sure. They may even have hung around to the 11th grade. And so, but the bottom line is they were in the 9th grade, and the state of Texas gets to say, well, they went to homeschooling, they moved out of state. We don't know what happened to these 30,000. We don't know. We don't know. Sure. The truth of the matter is, if we can get the bucks, we will put in a public information request that will get to the bottom of that. So you're right. We do know, as a matter of fact, here are the two things we know as a matter of fact. Just over 99,000 students who were enrolled in 2015-16 in the 9th grade were not enrolled in Texas public schools in 18-19. We know as a statistical fact that the vast majority of those children were African-American and Latinx. I'm 72 years old. I'm learning this. Bear with me, okay?
No worries.
So, but even with those children that stayed, even those children who did not fall by the wayside, that's the real result of 2018-19 in a freshman class, which is where the freeway walls block and the freeways are closed and the exit paths become very easy for children.
Tremendous.
And there's a cynical way to say this. Right. There is a cynical way to say this, and I'll say it because I'm cynical. Does the state of Texas have a vested interest in dropouts? We may attack that question some other time.
There we go. Mr. Scott, we're almost halfway through our time together today. We'll let you finish your presentation. Go for it.
All right, well, look, what's the byproduct? What this table shows is that the students that do graduate, most do not get a degree. The important thing about this table is this, that the Higher Education Coordinating Board captures more than students that go to Texas public schools in this report. They work through a national clearinghouse, so they have access to out-of-state students. The vast majority of students from Texas go to a college or university in Texas, but there's some out. This one is including all. So let's take Boy, Klein probably wishes that there was A through J in the district above it. But of the economically disadvantaged students, what it shows is a lot of them did enroll in higher education, 70.7%. But of those that ever enrolled, 45.3% never got a degree, never got a certificate. And then you can dig deeper in the higher ed board reports. Of those that enrolled, 6.6 earned a two-year degree, and 17.9% earned a four-year degree. Look at the difference between economically disadvantaged and non-educationally disadvantaged. It is significant, it is profound, and even in the context of students that are never found, what we have is a situation where we are pushing a lot of students, and you're going to see this in the final table, then we're going to get to all that other stuff. What you're seeing is we have a profound push for students to enroll in community college, okay? It's an open enrollment. There are some programs that are different, but the one that we're going to look at, which traces students in Texas, we have 30 and 40 and even 50% of the children who enroll in community college in districts throughout the state of Texas, we'll look at these five in particular, who have a GPA of 2.49 in the year after they graduated from high school. Those that graduate in the spring go to a Texas college or university in the fall, and the higher ed board captures their GPAs. What's important about 2.49? The important thing about 2.49, which includes less than 2.0, is these are students that are subject to quick expulsion or probation. They leave the state of Texas, where equity is expansive. We have equity in Texas. And then they go to an institution of higher education, and significant percentages of students are not making it in the first year in 2-year and 4-year degrees. And it's even more aggravated in community colleges. And when you look at the 6-year graduation rates, don't expect a sea change because this is the class of 2011. Look at the numbers. Look at the differential between non-educationally disadvantaged and economically disadvantaged. I'll make the next one even quicker, but here's the bottom line going back to the start. The state of Texas has a vested interest in pretending that more students are passing a test because most people won't look at the tables you and I just looked at. Bottom line.
There we go.
And they know it.
Speaking of tables, Mr. Scott, here's the last table that we have as part of your presentation. Tell us what we're seeing here.
What you're seeing is from these districts, the number of graduates at those districts, the percent that were not found in public education in Texas, not nationwide, but in Texas. Independents are included in the total grads, but the GPAs are only for those that were in a public institution in Texas from fall to from spring to fall administration. So the numbers speak for themselves. Remember, we were saying that community colleges are particularly, look at that, Klein, 44, 43, 48, 41% of the students that went to a 2-year from Klein had below 2.49. McAllen, 50, 59, almost 60%. We're behind the chart already. You can look yourself at the numbers for the two. Pasadena, 14% of the students at Pasadena High School enrolled in a 4-year university. 25% of that had a university GPA of below 2.49, and 50% of those that enrolled in a community college had that low. Students who make passing grades in their freshman year may drop out as sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Students drop out for many reasons, not including grades. What this is drive down a long row and you have a series of red flags. You're just driving between red flags. I call this the red flag table. So that's the story, that's the picture of these 5 districts. But to give some context, these districts are not radically different from districts of their profile. We're not picking on these districts per se, but we are using the fact that there was an honor for educational excellence to make a point. And that's part of what we said earlier. We're going to do things because we have to show the local data to show, as one person coined before, the evildoer. And the evildoer is the TEA. The evildoer is the state of Texas. So that pretty well wraps up. I know it took longer.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
But I think this is very important to internalize.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Appreciate your sharing these numbers. I have a feeling that when we see the bar charts that are to come, it'll help to put into context why we see such high numbers that are doing so poorly in higher education and post-secondary studies, simply because we need to make sure that we're providing the best possible education while we have them in our K-12 schools here in Texas. We want to draw the attention of those who are with us to the bottom right of our screen where it says tlsba.org/research. That's where you'll find our latest monograph on how it is that the HEB Excellence in Education finalist districts are serving our Latino students here in the state of Texas. We'll begin here with a bar chart for 6th grade reading, and we'll see if we can focus our eyes on what it is that we're seeing in this chart, since many of the charts are going to look similar to this. So, Mr. Scott, we were understanding that there are 2 cut marks that you were talking about in previous tables. So the top cut mark is those who are at grade level. The bottom hurdle to clear.
All right, well, look. If you learn this table, you learn how to read 6th grade reading, and gosh, I wish I could do tables graphics this good. Here's the bottom line. We'll just go through it real quick. Once you've read one, you can read other. I have boring numbers. Remember our Lives of Texas started with numbers, damnable numbers, okay? Because I'm a numbers guy. Carlos is a graphics guy, communication. Here's the bottom deal. Remember, fail. The bottom line is those that just outright failed the test. Okay?
Okay.
The 32% were those that just performed in the approaches standard. Okay? And you add that up, and that's below grade level. So in Klein, 69% were below grade level. The reason I know this is correct, because I can do 3rd grade math. Okay, 69 plus 31 is 100. It's 100% of the students. So as you go through this, remember the gray is the academic crutch that TEA claimed for itself, hopefully bamboozling civil rights attorneys and advocates to not do an effective job representing the interest of minority group children in a court of law. 32% are those that were at approach, but below grade level. And that's the way it reads. United, and look at it. Klein, McAllen, Pasadena, United, even Wiley.
What we're seeing is that the majority of students are not at or above grade level in any of these in 6th grade.
In that test. Yeah. I mean, on that test in that grade, yes, that's what that shows.
Whew. Mr. Scott, we'll go to the next slide. So this puts this is 6th grade math now, and putting it side by side with the table that you had previously shared. Tell us what it is that we might be able to understand by putting these side by side.
All right, this is 6th grade math. These students in Klein, that looks to be 23. Is that 22?
Bottom 22. There you go.
All right. In Klein, 22% of the students in Klein in 6th grade math scored and did not get 34.2% of the questions right. 41% got between 36.8 and 57.9% of the questions right. And 36% got at least 60.5% of the questions right. There's a real question as to whether meets grade level is actually meets grade level. Okay. We know they fudge here. And I know based on additional research that we're not talking about today, this is probably some of the most expensive fudge you'll ever taste, the grade level itself.
Let's look carefully at this, Mr. Scott, because I'm understanding that the TEA does not report out the white and the gray separately. In the numbers that they report, the white and the gray are lumped together so that they can say,
well, it's a yes and no answer to your question. It's more no than yes. They don't surround it with a beacon. They do report grade level. Okay, they do report grade level. And so if 37% of the students are at grade level, you know that 61% for sure, 63% are not. Okay, but in approach, they lump approach together so that to do what I'm doing and what we're doing, you have to use, again, you know, what I would call Jethro Bodine math. I mean, it's not hard. Okay. But so the bottom line is these are the numbers. They're always going to be the numbers, and they're never not going to be the numbers. That's what this means.
Let me rephrase my question, Mr. Scott. To your knowledge, does the TEA report this gray as, do they report the percent of students who passed but who are below grade level?
Not directly. They make you do an additional, you know, you're looking at an AEIS report or a TAPA report, and you have to take your calculator with you. They do not report it like this. Okay. Period, paragraph, end of story. I couldn't do it without their numbers. I have their numbers so I can do the transition to make the numbers sing this well.
Sure. This is simply looking at sixth grade math without the side charts. We're going to speed by this, which brings us now to when we begin to compare students of various races and ethnicities. When we speak about academic achievement gaps, this is where we start seeing gaps. Mr. Scott, when you see this chart, anything in particular that jumps at your attention?
The tragedy, and I'm not doing that as hyperbole. Goodness gracious alive. This is Dr. Matthias, you were in the room. You were present when I asked the direct question at a Texas Association of School Board of Directors meeting to the Commissioner of Education. Commissioner, where does the TEA define its burden of constitutional equity? And you know, he didn't want to answer it. And I said, no, I do want you to get legal with me. Where do you define it in terms of Senate Bill 7, which created this testing system, the 1995 Supreme Court decision that validated the constitutionality, and the January 2000 federal court decision that validated it federally? Is it the cut score of approaches or the cut score of meets? And you know what the answer was? To his everlasting credit, he said the cut score of meets. And so when I see these tables, I am deeply moved that I have personally been unsuccessful in convincing the right people with the right power. And this is, I'm a conservative. We've talked about that. I'm talking about from the Southern Poverty Law Center, where most conservatives won't venture, to talking to civil rights attorneys in Texas. And we cannot get that. May I divert for a second? When I ran for the Katy ISD school board for the purpose of convincing the superintendent and the district to sue the state of Texas, the solution to this is if all of these districts will say, I'm tired of putting up with this. We're tired of putting up with this. The school districts of the state of Texas, I would hope, should try to enjoin the state of Texas from enforcing this accountability system that is malfeasantly dishonest in terms of academic credibility, and get a court to let them have 3 years to devise a new accountability system. When I ran for the board, we had a superintendent that bought into that agenda. We were moving down that path, and then external politics brought it apart. It just fell apart. And so you asked me, what do I see? I see an opportunity for school districts to stop feeling that there is no alternative with the TEA. There is an alternative. And the one thing that I know you and I are trying to do is not to make enemies of school districts. That's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is to say the system is corrupt, the system is dishonest, and if you and other school districts will go together, we believe you could put a stop to this madness, because at one point in time, if we could get the TEA, the testing contractors, and all the people who have made millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars off of the system under oath in a court of law and ask them the right questions, we might be able to bring genuine reform and free school districts from this hostage situation that they've been in for 30 years.
And in the meantime, what we're seeing, Mr. Scott, from the perspective of the Texas Latino School Boards Association, we know that the third bar in every set of bars is for Hispanic or Latinx students. We see that, for instance, in the Klein ISD, we're getting 31% of sixth grade students to grade level in reading. We're getting 27%, just over a quarter of students to grade level in reading by sixth grade in the Pasadena ISD. This is sobering.
It is sobering. It is tragic. And I hope that it explains our passion, why we are doing this, why we have started down this path. And I mean, you're making this free. People can read people can go see the webinar relive. Once you know, here's the beauty of your graphs, particularly your graphs and my tables. If you read the first one, you can read every one of them. And so you can, it's not hard. And the story is simultaneously tragic at all grade levels.
What strikes me here as we put sixth grade reading beside sixth grade math are the large gray areas in sixth grade math. It's just shocking that we would have, we have this high bar to be able to be at grade level. So what we've done is we've radically lowered, we've created this lower standard for Texas to be able to assert that it's meeting its constitutional, statutory, and moral obligation to provide an equitable education to all students. It's grievous. Right.
That's it. That kind of slaps you in the face, doesn't it?
Yeah, here
that's
we see
big.
Equity gaps. When, for instance, we were just to look at the Klein ISD to see that we're only getting 9% of students to grade level in a subject is, and again, this has nothing to do with these individual districts so much as the system under which these districts are operating. But here we see not more than 1 in 5 at-risk students is at grade level in this subject area.
That's right.
Here we see English 1 laid out beside the graph that beside the table that you had previously shared with us, Mr. Scott. What strikes me here too is the very small, it seems like we're serving extremely well the students who are easier to teach. The students who are more difficult are at-risk students. It seems that that's where we're extremely challenged. We see the high number of those who are outright failing the test versus the very low number of those who are failing the test who are not at risk.
That's right.
Those are real gaps.
These are real gaps.
Here we see the gaps for English 2, similar. And so this is simply our attempt to summarize in text what is it we saw in a previous section of the monograph, how these large gaps exist in these 5 exemplary districts. As we note on this slide, if an award were bestowed for the closure of the achievement gap in math, it seems that would go to the Pasadena ISD. Note the Pasadena ISD shows the narrowest gaps in 5 of the 7 grade levels, but for us to be seeing gaps of 58 points, for instance, at English 1 and English 2 is staggering.
Well, and the sum total of this and others is that the state of Texas, and I keep coming back to this, I have to keep coming back to this. We have to keep coming back to this. You've served on a school board, I've served on a school board. We're never able to accomplish everything that we want to accomplish for all kinds of reasons. But school districts have to pay the price. And there is such an intimidation level that comes into play. If you've been spanked for 30 years and you know that the TEA hovering above you has authority over you, it just becomes more difficult to take that step. That's if I had a wand, if I had a magic wand, it would be that what happened to us in Katy when we were marching down a path to actually sue the state of Texas 4 years ago, that events beyond control of mine and others took over, and we lost that opportunity through no fault of anyone, is to try to find a way, an avenue. And here's what I am 100% convinced of. The state of Texas really should not want to have to tell the truth, the whole truth, in a court of law, being questioned by attorneys who actually understand the public education accountability system of the state of Texas. And to be kind, perhaps they didn't have the best advisors. Perhaps they didn't digging into the numbers was too complex. Oh, people, that's just numbers. People don't care about numbers. No, those are not numbers. Those are not numbers. They are children of the state of Texas, that the state of Texas has not told the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about grade level, about closing the achievement gap, and about meeting their genuine constitutional right. William Wayne Justice said it in 1971-72. Separate but equal, and racism and segregation were ending. And William Wayne Justice said the TEA will develop curricula offerings, will develop programs that, quote, compensate minority group children for past racial and ethnic isolation. Quote, out of that command grew student accountability testing. Bottom line, TABS, teams, TAC, TAWS, TAC STAR. And it became constitutional in 1989-90. That's a long time ago, Dr. Matthias. I was young then. I had one of my earlier jobs back in 1989. And the compensation of testing has advanced 30 years so that the state of Texas can continue its bald-faced lie about academic integrity. Maybe the state of Texas wants to sue me for slander, and I could get them in a deposition. I don't want to go through that. But that's what's happening. People have to have, if we're going to help these children, it's not about my passion. It's not about your passion. It's about 60 and 70 and 80% of the kids who take the ninth grade test are flunking it below grade level, and the state gets a green check mark. Kids in junior high school are getting below grade level in basic skills, but the state gives themselves a green check mark. Who is going to finally stand up, take the green marker out of the Texas Education Agency's hand, and focus on justice for children? And if you and I have led people astray by thinking we're mad at HEB, then God forgive us, we're not. That's not what our goal was.
Well said.
If people think that we're trying to humiliate or embarrass Pasadena, McAllen, United, Wiley, and Klein, or the 15 or 20 more districts to come next, then forgive us. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying through your courageous organization to see if we can make a breakthrough that tells school districts, you don't have to take this anymore. You've got millions, cumulatively millions of dollars of research professionals. We've got people who could come in and help on this. We're not wanting to pick a fight. We're trying to create an alliance for these children. And the status quo and going along with the status quo has not worked for 30 years, and it ain't ever going to work.
Mr. Scott, we need to get to results in higher education. On our way there, we have some writing scores that I include here simply because they do show gaps, again, large gaps between at-risk and not at-risk students, but also because these charts show us that we struggle to get a quarter of our students to grade level in writing in the 4th and 7th grades when they're assessed for their writing skills.
Well, remember, this is not the statewide results, and it's not the other ethnicities that are doing better. We're talking about the at-risk kids.
That's right.
Do you want a funny story?
Go for it.
Ha 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 ha. In this year's STAR test, I'm predicting that writing scores are going to go up. You want to know why?
Go for it.
They're not going to give a writing test. They're not going to have a composition. You can look at the underlying statistics. This is why I'm a nerd, and I apologize. You can look at the underlying statistics of the writing, and there's a writing sample. And if you look at 4th grade and 7th grade and English 1 and English 2, where there's writing assignments, you can look and see how relatively poor students do on the writing sample. Overall, the passing score is 2. You have a lot of mean average scores if you take the entire universe of students tested in writing. You'll see that the mean score is right at about 2, 2.0, 2.2, something like that. Well, if you have the mean score of 2.0, that means that there's a lot of scores below 2.0. Yeah. That's what that means. So one of the ways to get improvement from this tragedy is, well, let's stop giving writing. Let's stop doing the composition.
With the 5 minutes that we have left, we're going to speed by. For instance, this is simply something that a person could do a quick screen grab of. We see such high percents of students who are below grade level in subjects like 8th grade social studies. It's for the at-risk students in these finalist districts. We're going to come now to higher education. So here, the dark gray areas of these charts or of these bars are especially important because what we notice here in Texas, we're pushing a lot of students into higher education, but large percentages of them are dropping out before graduation. So here we see the overall numbers for a district, followed by the non-ECHO-DIS students, followed by the economically disadvantaged students. Mr. Scott, any quick thoughts on this before we go to some colored charts?
No, I think that once people download this and once people read it as a total, they'll get the entire picture. And this is just a part of the picture. Okay. We actually covered it in the table earlier.
So we'll go on to our last slide then in the 3 minutes that we have together. And that is simply, it's taking now the tables of numbers that you have shared with us, Mr. Scott, and our attempt here at the TLSBA to visualize them. We thank Carlos on our team, who is an absolute genius when it comes to being able to visualize data. He takes a table like you present on the right-hand side of the screen and turns them into the charts that we see on the left-hand side of the screen. What we're able to do and what we share in this monograph on HEB Excellence in Education Award finalist districts is that we break out how it is, what numbers of students are going into higher education. At the top chart on the left-hand side, we see the black represents those who are not found in higher education. In light green, those who go to 2-year schools and those who go to 4-year schools in dark green. So it gives some idea of the numbers of students going into higher education. But then on the lower left side of the screen, we see their GPAs after a single semester in higher education.
I think it's a year. I'm not sure, but I think it's the year, but that's their GPA.
And we see that we see 2 sets of bars for each school in each district. The top bar is for those who go to 4-year schools. The bottom bar is for those who go to 2-year schools. What we see here, especially that bottom bar of every high school, shows the high number of students who are pushed into 2-year schools and who are failing out of those 2-year institutions, presumably in large part due to their lack of preparedness for higher education. Mr. Scott?
Yes, I mean, that's the bottom line.
What we see here with large portions that are dark green and large portions of red, we see that students who go off to higher education typically do very well or do very poorly in higher ed.
That's right. And by looking at that chart of the economic, non-economic graduates, we know that the economically disadvantaged have a disproportionately lower success rate.
That brings us to the end of our time together, Mr. Scott. With the 2 minutes that we have together, any final thoughts as we reflect on? Again, we want to express our deep, deep gratitude to HEB and all our friends there for their commitment to public education through the years. Millions upon millions of dollars that they've dedicated to public education in Texas, and we are grateful. By their lifting up 5 education excellence finalist districts, it allows us to be able to look at how well they, as a representative sample of school districts in Texas, are serving our Latino students, our economically disadvantaged students, our at-risk students. And what we've seen in this presentation is sobering. We direct the attention of all to our TLSBA website, tlsba.org/research, to read the full monograph. And Mr. Scott will give you the final words today.
We're not in search of enemies, we're in search of allies. This is about, as long as we stay focused on what is the best interest, what is the best way to close the achievement gaps and meet the constitutional needs of disadvantaged children. As long as we stay focused on that, then we know a dishonest testing accountability system is not a part of the solution. And the sooner we can move away from that, the better off these kids will be. And we want allies, not enemies.
Thank you, Mr. Scott, and thank you to all who've joined us for this webinar. We'll look forward to returning next Tuesday at noon at Central Standard Time for a similar study of the districts of our TASA and TASB officers. In 2 weeks, we'll be back with the districts of our MASBA and TALAS officers. In 3 weeks, we'll be back with the districts of the officers of the Texas Caucus of Black School Board Members and the Texas Association of Black School Educators. And so that no one think that the TLSBA think itself exempt from all of this, 4 weeks from today, we'll conclude this series by examining the top 20 Latino serving districts in the state, which is where our board of advisors here at the TLSBA are part of. So let's look forward to seeing what all of this tells us about our students, and let's see what call to action this has for all of us here. Here at the TLSBA, we believe that our students deserve their day in court. They deserve excellence in education. Thank you, Mr. Scott. What a delight to be with you this afternoon.
More work.
More work. Let's get to it.